I never expected to hear a human scream on council grounds. My designation is Talon 3, Archivist of the Concord Bureau, stationed at the Aurelius Spire, an interstellar academy where 1,000 species pretend that discipline is the same thing as civilization. My job is to watch, record, and pretend that every incident can be filed under precedent. The Council's provost guards prefer outcomes that make neat paperwork: confessions, fines, demerits, a night in restraint. That morning began with the usual procession of grievances: a smuggled spice pellet from the Ithri quarters, a dispute over water allotments among the Chiron, a human cadet reprimanded for refusing to kneel during the anthem of a planet he did not serve. I wrote what the rubric demanded. Cadet interfered with ceremonial decorum. It should have ended there. The provost captain, a tall Charonite with silver mandibles and a love for rules that cut like glass, read the charge and dismissed protocol. He ordered the guards to strip the human cadet's jacket in the open concourse and bind him to an old brass post meant for ceremonial penance. The cadet's name on the registry was Auris Vale, 19 standard cycles, Terran exchange, top percentile in navigation, low percentile in compliance. The whip they used was braided with a conductive filament that hummed when the charge built in its core. They called it corrective, as if electricity could ever teach anything except pain. When the first strike landed across the cadet's back, echoing against marble and void, the Academy's babble fell silent like a star choked out by its own gravity. I have heard many sounds that define the borders of empires: treaties signed, engines ignited, a fleet rising in perfect formation. But the sound that day was the hushed gasp of a hull realizing it had made a mistake it could not unfurl from. Auris Vale did not cry out after the first strike. He pressed his chin to his chest, strained against the restraints, and breathed through his teeth like a diver counting seconds under black water. When the second and third strikes came, he whispered something I only caught on review. 3 words that do not translate cleanly. Do not kneel. The provost captain raised his hand for a fourth, because power loves audiences. In my recording, my voice can be heard asking, soft, foolish, if the hearing might resume behind sealed doors. Discipline is public, the captain said, and let the lash fall again. That was the moment the council stopped administering law and began manufacturing a war. The concourse held its breath and then released it as gossip. Alien cadets watched from the stairwell alcoves, pretending curiosity was neutrality, and the senior instructors stood near the dais as if their stillness made them impartial. The human contingent, 31 cadets, 4 instructors, 1 liaison, formed a crescent at the back of the hall. None shouted, none reached for weapons. They were very still, and every one of them had a wrist link glowing with the same muted symbol, a small circle pulsing like a metronome on the slowest beat. The provost captain delivered 7 strikes in total. I know this because the concourse clocks bled seconds into my notes, and because I watched the 7th arc spark and catch Vale's collar, burning a tiny half-moon into the fabric. When the lash finally lowered and the captain declared the lesson concluded, the guards cut the restraints and let the cadet fall to one knee. A council medic approached with a med spray, and Vale refused it, not rudely, but with a slow shake of his head and a rasped, "Document first." He stood with help from his cohort, walked under his own weight to the infirmary, and did not look back at the captain. I filed the incident and tagged it for internal review. Then my peripheral flashed a restricted ping across the bureau channel. It was a mirror of what had been sent across a human network the moment the lash had first cracked, an authenticated emergency relay, distributing the footage and the biometrics of Cadet Auris Vale to 1,000 ships and 100 colonies that care far less about council procedure than council credibility. In the mess hall after, alien cadets returned to their noisy assumptions. The Chiron joked that humans make a theater of everything. The Ithri bet on whether the provost would write the incident up as non-lethal correction. The Charonites compared the whip used today to older models retired for optics. Human cadets ate in silence, every tray placed and removed at the same time, every wrist link still pulsing that slow circle. It was the quietest mutiny I have ever seen. In the evening, I walked the transit ring to clear the static from my nerves. Out beyond the Academy's glass, the Aurelius Spire's orbital track cut the crescent edge of Orphan Prime. The Council's jewel world, a planet that believes itself beyond consequence because it has always been the place where consequences are declared for others. Lights glittered along the equatorial cities like threads on ceremonial robes. I tried to imagine them dimming and could not. I tried to imagine a response measured enough for policy and strong enough for pride and came up empty. Somewhere in the human quarters, a liaison placed a call she did not need to voice. Somewhere far away, relay buoys pivoted like flowers to the sun. The academy woke to the wrong kind of quiet. The loud cadets were loud. The braggarts bragged. The provost captain strode through corridors with his shoulders back and his mandibles polished to a lecture sheen. But underneath the sounds we were practiced at hearing ran a second silence. Human cadets moved in clusters of 3 or 4, not whispering, not rousing support, but calibrating their schedule like a choreography. Their instructors did not pace. They watched the clocks. The liaison, a woman of few words and fewer indulgences, never raised her voice. She merely sent a list of requested supplies, bandages, nutrient gels, a private room with controlled humidity, and I saw the requisition approved within seconds with a code that did not originate from the academy. Rumor is a faster currency than credit. By mid-morning, ITHRI technicians reported ghost pings in the outer sectors. A flurry of drive signatures along the midmost lattice where nothing usually moves except freight and drones. Our defense administrator called them market noise. An hour later, I passed the human cadet lounge and saw, through the narrow view strip, 31 datapads synced and displaying the same crimson screen. No text, no crest, only that slow circle pulsing at a revised tempo. One of the instructors, gray-haired, eyes like a patient cut of stone, tapped his wrist and all 31 pulses aligned exactly. I have documented many kinds of unity. The loudest kinds are often the weakest. This was the other kind. The provost captain, to his credit or doom, expected his authority to reproduce itself. He ate with his cohort and recounted, to appreciative laughter, how he had restored decorum to a species too fond of improvisation. He argued that the council's laws mattered more than any one child's pride. He called the lash symbolic. It always is until it lands. The instructors of other species gave interviews to Bureau subchannels, rehearsing words like context and jurisdiction. The human liaison gave none. By afternoon, the academy sky shifted. The Aurelia spire rotates through a blue-white daylight calibrated to ease the migraines of 7 light-sensitive species. The tone ticked 1 notch toward storm gray as the station's external sensors cut their filters to process incoming noise. Pilots who teach formation flying know a certain kind of haze, the one space makes when mass arrives in disciplined silence. I stood in a lift beside the provost captain as the status board flickered from traffic, moderate to traffic, irregular to traffic, classified. He inclined his head and said that freighter captains never schedule their cargo. It was nothing. Then as the lift doors parted, we both heard the academy's long siren roll overhead, the tone unused except during reactor drills or sovereign arrivals. The provost captain did not smile then. He did what men like him do when consequence stops being theoretical. He quickened his pace toward a room where he believed words could still rearrange reality. Sirens sealed doors, and the Aurelia spire moved like an organism, deciding what parts it might live without. Through the concourse's vaulted glass, something the size of a city bloomed into view, and then another. Then another. Not flamboyant, not festooned with banners, as council navies prefer, but without names painted on their hulls at all, as if any word would be a distraction from the geometry. A human formation unfolded from slip space in layers that looked like patience taking form, wedges of carriers shadowed by knife-thin destroyers, a reserve of escorts at precise intervals, a screen of signal masking craft attached like a second hidden skin. The first communication we received was a request to open a wideband to the planet below. The second was a demand for the provost captain's full roster, certification logs, and disciplinary authorities. The third was a tight beam hailed to the Academy Council, signed by an admiral I had only read about in rumor reports, Quynn of the Terran Union Strategic Command. She appeared on our primary display without flourish, a woman in a dark uniform whose eyes did not move more than they needed to. Her voice was quiet and carried. "A child of ours was brutalized on your soil," she said. "You recorded the wounds and published them to your legal archive under the word decorum. That is an act of war." The council chancellor, an accomplished practitioner of benevolent disapproval, protested that the punishment had been lawful under the Academy's codes. "Lawful cruelty is still cruelty," Admiral Quynn said. "You chose to teach with pain. We choose to answer with clarity." The feed split then, and our orbital grid rendered a model of Orphan Prime's shield network as human scanners finished their pass. Rings of blue light resolved into a wireframe that looked almost tender, like the diagram of a child's toy, and then a tag appeared in the top right corner: countermeasures and estimated time to disarm. Human escorts peeled outward and began to slice the grid with finesse that could have been mistaken for mercy if one did not understand what came after. Within minutes, key relays blinked out like candles pinched in a practiced hand. The planet's defenders scrambled to compensate. The Academy's instructors whispered. The Praevis captain's mandibles clicked in a rhythm I learned to interpret as panic. Admiral Quynn did not posture. She said, "Surrender the officers who carried out the act. We will accept them into our custody for trial under Terran Charter and Interstellar Convention." The Chancellor said such a thing would set a dangerous precedent, and that planets cannot permit other planets to claim jurisdiction over their discipline. "We are not asking your planet to surrender," Admiral Quynn said. "We are asking you to surrender those who set the standard for cruelty and called it instruction." She displayed a timer. It began at 8 hours and counted down. 8 hours is a long time to do a small right thing, and a very short time to explain a wrong one. The Academy frothed with meetings. Lawyers grand and minor sprinted through corridors in the sudden humility of those who see their skill become irrelevant. The Provost captain retreated to his office and wrote a message to his superiors that I am told used the word sovereignty 5 times and the word optics twice. In the city below, I watched from the observation deck as traffic tried to form a pattern. Some citizens fled to the countryside in an instinct as old as fire. Some clustered around governmental domes as if proximity to marble made one immune to consequence. Some stood in their windows and stared at the sky as if by choosing not to cower, they could cast themselves as brave in the story they feared was coming. Human ships did not strafe or buzz the towers. They waited. They did not broadcast decibels and slogans. They did not send ballads to their dead. They sent a second message with coordinates of free passage corridors where refugee shuttles could transit unmolested, and warned that any military signature within those lanes would be treated as a deception. The Chancellor convened an emergency convocation and invited Admiral Quynn to offer conditions. The Admiral did not appear again. A lieutenant with a clear voice read them: surrender the Provost captain, the 2 guards who carried out the whipping, the instructor who ordered public discipline beyond rubric, and the council member who had signed a memo 3 years prior, increasing maximum charges on correctional whips for deterrent visibility. I had read that memo. It had sounded so careful in its phrasing that you could almost miss the intent. The Guard's homeworld leadership issued a defiant statement, recorded against a backdrop of flags. They said no one would be taken for trial by foreign hands, that Orphan Prime's judicial pride was not to be haggled away. They added a line meant to sound righteous about not bending to the children of a death world. I have spent a lifetime categorizing rhetoric. This was the kind that is used to shore up a vote and never meant to hold a wall. Still, the 8 hours thinned. At 2 hours, human technicians pushed an update to the evacuation corridors, widening them and adding new paths for shuttles of species whose drives sputtered at certain frequencies. They thought to ask the question that matters in rescue: who cannot follow simple directions? And how do we change the directions, not the people? At 1 hour, I visited the infirmary. Aris Vale lay on his side under a sheet the medics had cut to keep fabric from touching the burns. He watched the ceiling and listened to the faraway sound of a city packing its valuables into boxes too small to hold what matters. I told him who I was and that I was here to record. He asked me if the lash would be filed as a learning outcome. I said I did not know. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since the morning, he looked not like a symbol, but like a child who had learned something he would have given anything not to know. "Do not kneel," he said again, and then softer, "Do not make them kneel either." There is a threshold in every story where choices stop branching and the path narrows until only one direction remains. We reached that threshold when the Chancellor announced, with the brittle poise of a man choosing his posture for the history texts, that Orphan Prime would not surrender its officers under duress. He asked Admiral Quynn to respect the Council and its processes. He urged her to consider proportionality, as if the math of harm could be done on a neat ledger, where a lash equals an apology, equals a fine, equals a night of remorse, equals trust restored. The timer ate its last minutes. The evacuation lanes filled with shuttles, and I watched through my scope as human picket ships peeled away to escort a transport of Osiri women who could not tolerate the gravity on the standard corridors. I watched a single shuttle dart across a prohibited zone and be warned, then be warned again, then be escorted back to safety by a human corvette that made a tiny shepherd's crook with its hull to guide the shuttle's nose. I say this not to excuse what came after, but to record it properly. The timer struck 0, and the night above Orphan Prime became a geometry of light. Human destroyers fired Husker rays, kinetic clouds that strike with less heat than tradition imagines, and more certainty than mercy allows, followed by lattice burns that traced the skeleton of power across the cities, and then slid, meticulously, down the spine of government installations. There are words for what a planet looks like when its lights go out forever. Most of them are not good enough. The Academy shuddered as debris arced along the upper atmosphere. The Provost Captain stood at the observation deck with his hands on the rail, watching the glow spread, and whispered a word I could not parse. In the infirmary, all the monitors flickered, and then the humans powered theirs from independent packs they had brought with them, while no one was paying attention. I do not know what bravery is anymore. Perhaps it is carrying a battery because you know you might not get help. The bombardment lasted exactly as long as the Admiral said it would, not 1 minute more. When it ended, the sky above the planet looked washed, a smudge where a bloom had been. The Academy's external panels recorded the dust rising and settling, and rising again as the atmosphere learned a new way to hold grief. Aris Vale did not cheer. He asked if the guards were alive. No one answered. The Council convened another meeting and decided that meetings are endurance sports rather than moral acts. Admiral Quynn transmitted a final packet, satellite imagery, casualty estimates that aimed low because you do, when you do not want to trust your count, coordinates of mass where help might still be help. Then she sent the line that would be repeated and misquoted across 100 systems. When you hurt a child and call it order, you teach the universe what order costs. We paid attention. In the weeks that followed, the Academy learned to speak softly. The Provost Captain was removed from duty by the same authority that had enthroned him, which is to say, no one significant admitted fault. The Council wrote new pages of policy with old ink. They renamed committees. They invented phrases. None of it stitched the sky. Humans did not return to business as usual either. They added a clause to their charter, passed by an overwhelming margin on a channel where votes pinged like metronomes speeding toward a decision already made. The clause did not carry a poet's flourish. It read like instructions, sometimes the only form compassion can take when you are tired of being misunderstood. No ward of the Terran Union, child, cadet, apprentice, novice, shall be subjected to corporal discipline under the jurisdiction of any foreign body. Any such act shall constitute a hostile offense against all Terrans, to be answered by strategic measures up to and including planetary incapacitation. They called it the Ward Accord. Some refer to it, less formally and more dangerously, as the Veil Provision. Those who argue about proportionality do so with careful voices now. Those who teach in places where many flags hang learn to ask different questions. I went to see Aris Vale one last time before transfer. His scars had begun to harden into the kind of map that strangers treat as an invitation to gaze. He wore a soft shirt that did not touch his back and kept his hands folded so he would not clench them when people told him they were sorry for what the world is like. I told him I was the man who had asked for the hearing to be sealed. He said he remembered. I told him I had written everything, even the parts that made me ashamed. He said that was the only reason to write. When he stood to leave, he swayed once and then steadied. He looked smaller than he had on the concourse that morning, which is a strange trick the young perform after great pain. They become children again in the corners of their movements, and you see the cost more clearly than the lesson. "Do not kneel," he said once more. Not like a banner this time, not like a command or a prayer, but like a line men say to themselves when they must carry a thing that was never their size. I filed my final report to the Concord Bureau. I did not call it a war, though others will, because wars begin and end and can be measured by parades. I called it a reckoning, because reckoning is the name for what happens when the bill for cruelty, compounded over years and disguised as tradition, comes due. The academies that read my report will change their correction policies. Some planets will frame the Ward Accord as tyranny to rally voters. Others will teach it as the moment the galaxy learned, again, that children are the line species draw not because they are weak, but because everything after them is an imitation of strength. The Aurelia Spire returned to its orbit. The city rebuilt daylight one circuit at a time. Dust fell. New glass was cut. In the plaza where the brass pennant post stands, a plaque appeared without ceremony, bolted to the stone, in a language most of us can read now. This is what it says: "A lesson given with a whip is a lesson unlearned. A lesson given with consequence is not forgotten. Remember the child. Remember the cost. Remember that order without care is only a prelude." And then in letters smaller but no less sharp, "The Ward Accord, veil provision, ratified and in force. I do not know if memorials teach. I know that stories do, if they are filed with all their errors intact. This is mine. I know that stories do, if they are filed with all their errors intact. This is mine."